remember that 3 or higher for an ACEs is really bad. Those where you find all those higher scores for negative outcomes for health and things like that. So in the state of Kansas, the average adult had a score on average of 7. Wow. That was so impactful and so surprising. So if you were correct, congratulations. If you are not, what can I say? That is a huge thing. So one of the things that I do want to say is ACEs is great for helping us understand adverse childhood experiences, potential traumas, and different things like that. However, it is not a diagnosis or even something that we consider with reintegrating a child. It helps us understand that there might be past trauma. It helps us be more mindful of whether or not we want to recommend a trauma assessment, etc. However, it does not have an impact on whether or not a child should be reintegrated back home. And one of the things we want to think about that is the separation experience for children. They love their parents regardless. And a lot of times, I want to take a second here. I say parents throughout this because I don't want to automatically assume anything about this family group. It could be a single mom. It could be a single dad. It could be a blended family. It might be their biological family and they have both parents. So I typically will say parents because I don't want to set the stage for other situations where it's always the single mom or it's always the 2-parent family or anything like that. So understand when I say parents, I'm thinking whatever that home is. And it could be a grandparent and child or a guardian and child. We recognize that that home environment is going to be different for each child. However, they are attached to that primary caregiver or those primary caregivers. And so removal may cause trauma. Now, I will say that there is a very small minority where remaining in the home causes more trauma than removing the child. And we have had children, more than one, talk to myself. I've had a couple, and I know volunteers who have had several over the years, where the child has actually thanked them because they felt safe for the first time. So there is a balance here, and I want to be cognizant of that. However, again, especially with that federal Family First legislation that we've talked about before, the emphasis is to try and leave the child at home if at all possible because we want the least traumatic events and the least restrictive situation for these families as possible. There could be trauma that we add by removing that child from the home, which is why we try to keep them at home or put them with a kinship placement, which could be related or non-related kin, and then go to the foster home type of situation. And even within out-of-home care or out-of-home placement, there are levels. There are foster families versus group homes. And so we want it to be the closest thing to their actual family setting as possible. Each new placement can potentially increase the trauma emotionally and psychologically. Sometimes there are safety reasons that they just have to be removed. But I want you to, before I go into the fourth point, I want you to close your eyes for a second with me, okay? And you may have heard this before, but I want you to close your eyes and wherever you are. You got up this morning, and whether you got dressed, you got ready, and whether you went to work or you went to school or you just went to the grocery store, for whatever reason you left the house. Now let's say that at that point in time, someone came up to you in authority that said, hey, you can't go back home. We are going to move you someplace else for the next, we don't sure how long. That's what those children experience. Sometimes they go to school. Sometimes they're taken right out of their house. And they don't necessarily get to collect up their belongings if they're out of home. So let's say that you're putting yourself in that child. standpoint, it's going to be even worse for them. Because whereas you're like, well, what do you mean I can't go home? Like, I've got meds there, I've got my other glasses there, like that's where my clothes are, how am I going to work, how am I going to go to school, how am I going to do this? Well, those children have those same questions, except it's compounded more. They may not have that stuffed animal that is their one thing that is there that helps them through the trauma. They are going to go to a new place where there may be strangers, but there's definitely new rules. How often they can even see their own parents may be one of them. New classes, new teachers, new doctors, new kids, new clothes. Can you imagine if you went to the grocery store or to work or wherever and that was it? You could keep your job, but you couldn't have your phone or access your house or stuff for the next 60 days. They'll give you a place to live and they'll give you food. It might not be food that you're used to. Might not even be food that you particularly care for, but you'll be fed. And even if you don't work in your office, you'll work someplace, so the money will still come in, because parents, as adults, we worry about, like, I have to pay the bills and stuff. But we might move you to another office, and you can't necessarily talk to your previous offices. Can't really communicate with them. And this person who you may never have met at this point, you may or may not, they're going to make all the decisions about your life for the next 60, 90, 180 days, a year or two, maybe until for the next 3 or 4 years. That causes you to be isolated and detached from your life. It is not a comfortable thing, and yet this is what ends up happening with the children, which is why we try to leave them at home if possible. We need to consider that separation experience and how that trauma might be more trauma than if we left them in the home with some safety regards, if we could manage risks and things like that. So I've been very doom and gloom for a bit, because when we're talking about ACEs and different things like that and all the medical consequences of ACEs, it can be overwhelming. But again, I'm not going to sugarcoat it. However, here is the amazing part. Your ACE score is not your destiny. You could have an ACE score of 0 or 1, and life does not going to be perfect for you because of that. And you could have an ACEs score of 9 or 10 and be an amazing success in life. Your ACE score is not your destiny. And why? Is because of something called resilience. And while we may not be able to control our adverse childhood experiences, we do have impact on how resilient we are or can become. This is where I get really excited, because this is what we do. We as CASA advocates want to help build resiliency in that child. It is a very individual thing. Some children are much more resilient than others. Some are much more impacted by trauma than others. We've talked about foxhole buddies, we've talked about different things, but resilience can be built and enhanced through practice and attention. That is amazing, because it doesn't force us to stay in that negative place. It allows us to move on and be much more positive and productive. We can overcome your adverse childhood experiences. So in your work as a CASA volunteer advocate, there are 7 C's of resilience. I don't know why they always want to give me all these alliterations and tongue twisters, but here we have it. This is what we're going to do. We're going to go over the 7 C's of resilience. Competence, confidence, connection, character, contribution, coping, and control. A lot of C's in there. All right, so competence. This is the ability to handle a situation effectively. Confidence. This is a belief in your personal abilities. Connection. This is having strong ties to family or community, It involves a sense of belonging with or to someone or something. Character. This is a solid set of morals and values to help determine right from wrong. Contribution. So this is feeling like a valuable member of society. Also inherent is this the ability to feel like you can make a difference for others, for your community. You have impact. Coping. This is the ability to handle stress appropriately. And then control. This is not like I can control the world. This is a knowledge, understanding of what you can and cannot have the ability to affect an outcome with. I cannot control the weather. I recognize that I cannot control the weather. Now, I can many times control how I respond to that weather. I cannot necessarily, I don't have the ability to control the weather. So I want you to think about these because we are going to come back to them in our interactive session and do something with them. And so I want to make sure that you are aware of what they are and kind of have a basic understanding. Now we are going to move into the next things now that we've talked about resilience and we want to help build resilience in the children. We're going to move on to the basics of communication. And this is really important because a lot of what we do is to communicate with others. And that you read a little bit about this, but we're going to kind of go through it together because it is such an essential part. There needs to be self-awareness, some sensitivity, and some skills to be effective at communication, especially in your ability to advocate for these children and families. So there are three basic components of communication. There is a verbal component, there is a nonverbal component, which we understand better now, and feelings component. So the verbal component, those are the actual words that you use to communicate. The nonverbal component, this is gestures, tone of voice, and anything unspoken. We really realized how many nonverbal parts of the conversations and how there were and how important they were during the pandemic when everybody was wearing a mask. And when you can't see most of my face, you really can't tell all the time exactly how I express myself because sometimes it's in facial features, and if you were missing those facial features, it affected how well we could communicate with each other. And then there's the feelings component, and this is the feelings that are experienced as a result of the communication or the words. You may use one word and your understanding of the word and their understanding of the word are two different things. I think of husbands and wives. If the husband says, the wife asks, what do you think of this outfit? Because they're out shopping and she's looking for that kind of honest second opinion. And then he's like, that looks nice. Because to him, nice works, but that's not as descriptive. And then a lot of times we know that that can cause miscommunications in marriage because he thought it looked really nice. But he didn't say really nice, he just said nice, and the words that he chose evoked a feeling, and now there's communication or miscommunication thereof. And I know that that sounds like a really trite way of describing it, but it's something we can all understand, and that is a key portion of it, is making sure we are understanding. So we are now going to move into talking a little bit more about communication in and of itself. With interviewing, we're going to kind of work on some interviewing skills. Let's talk a little bit with parents. Overall, whether it's parents, children, placements, regardless, I want you to talk about these interviews. I don't even like the word interview. I want you to talk about these conversations as conversations. They are not interrogations. these should not be stressful times for everybody. They should be much more relaxed and conversational, and there's a give and there's a take, and yes, you want some questions answered, and we're going to talk about that a little bit later on. But yes, we're gathering that information, but that doesn't not necessarily, we don't want it to be in an adversarial nature. We want it to be a conversational, friendly nature. So what are those very first steps that you have when you have a conversation? Well, I would say you're going to introduce yourself. And that is something that we will talk about in our interactional session for session 2. We're going to introduce ourselves and how that goes. But there are a few things that you do need to consider when you introduce yourself and when you're having this first conversation, especially with the family or placement. One, confidentiality and information. So you need to make sure that they know that what they tell you is not in confidence or confidential. It is not like in the Roman Catholic Church where they confess to a priest and he's not allowed to say anything except under extreme circumstances, right? That is not, there's no expectation of privacy to the conversation within the case. So this is where we go outside of the case and within the case. Information that you gather here, things that you learn here, you share within the case. So you're going to share it in your court report. You're going to share it with the CASA staff. No one outside of who's allowed to have that information will have it. And that's how it's confidential from those outside. Hey, I'm not going to be telling everybody your business. However, what I learn does go in my court report, and that will, so the judge will see it, the parents' attorneys will see it, the social workers will see it, the guardian ad litem will see it, and the CASA staff will see it. We are not allowed to share that information outside of that. That's why we went through that confidentiality chart, and we talked about that earlier. So help them understand that what they share with you is not confidential within the case. It is confidential without the case. Now you have to make the decision whether it's important to share. If it's not information that is relevant to the case and they may just share a something that happened in the past or a question, it may not be relevant to the case, in which case you don't have an obligation to share that. But if it is relevant to the case, you do have an obligation to share that. So that's one of the first things that you want to make sure they understand. And then I like to explain how these visits are going to go. We're just visiting together. We're hanging out. They're going to happen about every 2 weeks. That's what our recommendation is. But at least once a month, I need to see the children face to face and just generally how it's going to go for a visit. And for me, when I was sitting down with parents, I would tell them, hey, I'm going to have certain questions that I'm going to ask you. And that I have to ask every time. So there's going to be certain things that I'm going to ask every time. And then it's just kind of where the conversation goes. And, we'll have a back and forth. I really am interested in progress. If there's something that I can recommend that the court do to help you or help in the family in the situation, or if you know of something that might help your child, let me know and I can see if it's something I can recommend and things like that. So this is what you're going to do. We'll have some questions. We'll have some conversations. We'll meet regularly. You do need to meet with the children at least once a month face-to-face, although we recommend every other week or twice, 2 to 3 times a month, if not more frequently, if there's a lot going on. So the other thing that I do is I always tell them at this point, I'm going to take notes. And so you'll see me jotting down notes. I'll have the questions. You're welcome to look at the questions. And so what I will do is, forgive this, okay. I will take a notebook like this, right? I normally a blank page first. And then you're going to love my questions. You ready? I will write questions like this. And then you'll notice I have a lot of space in between these questions. And I might write 3 or 4 per page, and I will write quick notes underneath them. Now, I warn them. I say these are for me so that I remember what we've talked about. If there's anything that, you want to share or anything like that, I want to make sure I get it accurately. I've never, ever, even with the most difficult parents, had them have a problem with this. Never run into that in the years that I've been doing this. I do say that if they want to see what these look like, they can see what I'm writing. I'm not keeping it a secret from them. They can look at it. I also, when I stop them, sometimes I want to quote them exactly. And I explain that if you say something and I want to quote you exactly, I may ask them to repeat themselves a couple of times. Like, I just want to quote you accurately. And then I'll show it to them and I'll be like, is this accurate? I don't want to misquote you. Well, first, I'm getting it correct, which is my number one thing. I want to make sure I'm quoting them correctly. But second of all, in doing that and building rapport and trust with parents and foster parents or placements and things like that, because they will then know that I'm not trying to misquote them. I'm not trying to change what they've said to meet my needs, that I am quoting them exactly. And if they want to change and tweak it a little bit, that's okay. That's their prerogative. But it makes them feel much more comfortable because I'm not trying to go about and subvert things. And there's a lot of trust that they have to place in us. I mean, we have impact on how quickly a child could return home or the situation. And so we don't want to set up an adversarial. We want to set up that friendly situation where we're working together towards the same goal, which is the best interest of the child. So I tell them about the notes. Now, what I will tell you is when I'm taking notes, there's a couple of things. I always date the notes right up here at the top. You can do this on a tablet or an electronic device. I like paper and pen. It typically makes parents feel more comfortable. So I just literally take a notebook like this. And so I'll put the date, I'll put who was there, and I'll put the time, the date, the time, and who was there. Right? That goes in here. And then I'll have my questions, and if I have 3 or 4, I may have a couple of pages of questions. Any point in time they can look. So what I write down here are literally just the answers to these questions. I don't put in my impressions, my thoughts, my opinions, or anything like that. And the reason why I don't is that's not what I'm there for at that point in time. I just want to get kind of like just the facts. Perfect. What we talked about, answering the questions. I might jot down some of the conversation that we have just so that I can keep track. It is very helpful. These notes really, really, really are helpful and basically help write the court report for you. And I'm going to talk about that again more later, but I do want to say that I cannot recommend enough that you do and you take these notes like I'm recommending. And then at that point, the conversation comes to, or the visit comes to an end. I always set the next time before I leave. That doesn't mean it's written in stone that it can't be moved if they have something come up or you have something come up or whatnot. Or, tornadoes happen. We've had a lot of tornadoes the past few days, so I'm like, they're very much in my head. So weather can happen. You could have a blizzard in the middle of winter. We live in Kansas. Weather happens all the time. And so we want you to be aware that, you have a date and a time. Now you can move it, but it's very important when you walk out the door, you always kind of have your next day and time. So at that point, I will leave the visit. I will literally get in my car and get to a place as close as possible that they can't see. So I used to pull out of it. I can picture one of the places I used to go for a baby, a 6-month-old baby. We'll talk more about her later. You'll hear more about her later in the training. But she was with her maternal grandparents, and they were placement, and I would leave their driveway. I would drive a half-mile back I was out on the country roads, and I would stop right there. Now, I've also had one child that was actually for a little time placed in Manhattan, and I would literally drive around the block, find a safe place to park and stop. The idea is you don't want to go too far away. And that is when I will pick my notes back up. And here's where I'm going to add all the impressions down. Mom seemed very fidgety. Dad kept talking over Mom and didn't seem to want her to bring up a certain subject. You know, the house was not in good condition. Here's what I saw. I saw, you know, there were dirty diapers everywhere. There were dishes dirty dishes all over. There was a smell of urine when I went in, and da 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 da. I might have had the smell of excuse me, marijuana or whatever. I'm going to write down all those things that I didn't want to put down in front of them. And why? Because they're my impressions. And if they start to read my impressions, it's going to change things. It could escalate situations. So the first thing you want to do is you want to take that and almost do like a mind dump and put all those impressions and all those observations that maybe you didn't list before for whatever reason, put them down now. And then you have your full notes. And then once that's done and you're in a, you know, and that's why I always say you want to get to the closest safe place where they can't see you, because you don't want them to see, why is she like pulling to the side, or like what is she adding? That is something, or what is he adding to his notes now? That could create animosity between the two, and we want it to be a very friendly thing. If you're comfortable putting those down in front of the parents, you are welcome to, or in front of whomever, you are welcome to do so. I just like to finish it, have an overall impression, and then dump it, because then it gives me a minute to think over everything, and you know, something might have struck me as funny in there, but then when I think about it, like, no, that makes sense. I've had a second to process it in my mind, versus if I had put it down right away, I might have thought that's a little funky. So remember that first visit, you're also going to do the Crime Victims' Rights Compensation brochure and have them sign off on that. These are how I like the visits to go, having very conversational. Now, you do need to be very age appropriate with the child, which is why we go into the ages and stages, and we've done that, and we kind of talk about things like that. We want to make sure it's appropriate. So one of the things that I had is I had a 7-year-old Spitfire, is what I call her. And Spitfire, man, I needed her to understand that confidentiality piece. And so what I did is I told her, hey, you know, the judge and I are share buddies. And she understood exactly what that was. What you share with me, I can share with the judge. So if you have any questions of the judge, or if you want to make sure the judge knows something, you let me know and I will share with the judge. Well, this was great, because then she would have questions for the judge, and Judge Segura at the time loved it. I know Judge Capola and Gary Court would love it too. What was she going to be? One of the questions is, she was like, what's she going to be for Halloween? Well, and the judge was like, wow, I don't know. I haven't dressed up for a while. And so we took a second in the hearing for this child. And the judge wanted to give her an answer, because that relationship was important. It wasn't just this faceless judge, although she never did see the judge, but it wasn't this person that she didn't have any interaction with that was making all the decisions for her. That simple interaction helps that 7-year-old understand that adults have to do what adults have to do. You know, things take a long time, but also she's forming this connection with the judge, and the judge is looking at, hey, how's the child doing? I'm interacting. And even though the Spitfire didn't go because she had school during the hearings and she was too young to be pulled out, she was also having some academic challenges. This really helped. And so the judge came up that, you know, what she was going to be and things like that. When I would go there, Spitfire was very into art. And so I would bring with me some plain pages, some markers, some crayons, some colored pencils, and some actual coloring books and things like that. And we would do artwork. She was very into art. And so she understood I wasn't giving them to her. They were something that I would bring with me if she wanted to. And so sometimes that's what we did during our visits. And it was funny, because sometimes she would typically make 3 pictures if she was going to do it. And there was one for me, there was one for the judge, and then there was one for us to share, because she really got that share buddies idea. I was age appropriate. She got it. And it's funny, because I would put all 3 pictures in my court report and attach it down. And I will tell you, that is the kind of stuff judges love to see. They love to hear about how that child's doing, you know, whether it's a toddler and they've just started to make the little elbow necklaces and stuff like that. And here's a picture of the child wearing the elbow necklace. Judges love that. They get to see the child that they wouldn't ordinarily see in court. And we will talk more about photographing children and the rules and regs of that. Although it's in your policies and procedures for a CASA Volunteer Advocate Handbook, I understand that the judges do really love to see that, or see a picture of you and the child and add that to the court report. But you need to be age appropriate, and it really helps on both sides. And it reminds everybody else that's looking at this report, this is a child we're talking about. These are children we're talking about, and they have desires and they have things. And they would love to see those pictures. And those pictures became part of the child's file because they became part of the court report. But that connection that 7-year-old had with myself and the judge made her feel empowered. We built resiliency because she felt like what she had to say made a difference. She had impact. But we need to do it in an age-appropriate way, and so I like to give you that as an example because it's a fun one to talk about. Having these, I keep talking about, so we will ask questions, but it's really important to ask the right questions and kind of have a plan. Like I said, I typically have certain questions that I'll ask every time. You know, if the child's old enough, is there anything you want me to share with the judge? Is there anything you need? You know, these are, we're going to get into this in a minute, so I'm trying to be really careful. I'll ask the same thing. Does placement have anything that they would like to share with the judge? We also make sure that they know that they can put in a placement court report, and we highly recommend that they do so that they have their own personal impact to that. Children of an age can also do a court report where they can speak to the judge that way as well, and we make sure that if they're old enough, they're aware. They can work through that with their CASA Volunteer Advocate, or they could do it with their guardian ad litem, or they could kind of fill out the form on their own. Parents, is there anything that you think of that I could recommend that would be beneficial to the family or to the child, etc.? And those are questions that I ask typically every time. There are some other ones, like I'll ask parents if they've made any progress on their case plan tasks, what case plan tasks they're actively working on. You know, those kinds of things are what I will typically ask. But asking the right questions is really, really important. So now we're going to watch one of my favorite videos.